Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So lovely to see you all here on TV. You're the best program yet. The third full day of Sesshin, third full day. And we can begin to notice the transformation that is taking place within each of us. Sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. Sesshin is a great forgetting the self. Something that happens despite our efforts, one way or the other. When we are not looking or trying, all of a sudden, dropping into a moment of stillness. And then I remember, I forgot, I was irritated. I was supposed to be irritated, but instead, deep stillness. Or walking somewhere, and like I did tonight, find myself just walking to the sunset in the middle of preparing dinner, despite myself. Forgetting what day it is. And better yet, forgetting why it matters, what day it is. Forgetting the usual obsessions of mind. What a relief. But some kind of forgettings are subtler. Maybe what arrives is a surge of raw emotion in the heart that we forgot to guard against, or we thought we couldn't handle. Yesterday, while sitting, or perhaps it was this morning, there was a sound in the distance that got louder than the refrigerator. And I recognized it as some geese, just a few at first. And then it got louder and louder and louder until it completely enveloped the Seido and flew right through my heart and landed in my left palm of my mudra, and then was completely silent. Forgetting the self. We slip out of the confinement of the prison of self, even though we are entranced with its hall of mirrors. We slip out. Our pandemic practice of Zoom is so fascinating because the most common complaint from us and others is we don't want to keep looking at ourselves, even though we do, which has been a great boon for the plastic surgery industry, just so you know, true. We don't want to look. But that's fascinating for us practitioners because it is the way things are in our own mind. We have a nice little inner Zoom box in our skulls that we constantly check ourselves against. Am I okay? Do I look all right? Am I doing what I should? Constant. But at Sesshin, we get a little unplugged. We forget about it. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves looking out, not at the inner Zoom box, but at the world. And the world looks back at us. You slip out. Yesterday, someone asked me in Sanzen, it was their second day, I guess, yeah. And she said she came, and at first she thought, isn't this a Sesshin about precepts? Shouldn't we be talking about the precepts? I mean, we're just doing the regular stuff. Sitting zazen, usual Sesshin forms, putting aside the thinking mind. And then she said, oh, oh, the precepts, here they are. This is so essential a point. If there's one thing to leave this Sesshin with, it is that there is no separation between zazen and the precepts. No separation. If we are practicing zazen, we are practicing precepts. From the very first time we sit zazen, there is an inherent question about who we are. It will change the way we interact with the world and ourselves, and will ask us to question how we go about our life if you sit zazen. So there is no way to avoid the precepts, whether one receives them formally or not. It's like saying, I'm going to do zazen with just the left half of my body, but not the right. It can't be done. They come as a whole. They are always functioning. But I want to come back to this slipping out, forgetting the self. We modern people, and I know many of you hear me speak about this again and again, are faced with an incredible challenge to our identities. We could say we're in an identity crisis at this point in human history. And the news media, while very well-intentioned journalists seeking to bring us the truth, which is important, the facts, are coming from a mind of dukkha, a mind of samsara. And the problem that we get as a reflection of who we are in the media impoverishes our sense of possibility. Every day we are constantly being told we are what, if you read the papers or the news feed, if you will, that we are violent and lascivious, dissatisfied, bigoted, hopeless. This message is being broadcast to us. And while it is a shadow side of who we are as human beings, it is patently untrue. But it feeds into the deep separation that Mushin so beautifully alluded to, this alienation of us in the world, us versus others, as we buy in unconsciously to that message and project out our shadow onto everyone else of the things we cannot accept inside ourselves. That is the challenge of the modern practitioner. Come to Sesshin, we slip out. We begin to slip out of that message. Because unless you have an eye to see it, leaping beyond the holy and the unholy is not headline material for the rest of the world. Unless you have an eye to see it. Unless you've truly stepped on the path, you do not see the beauty in the story Mushin told yesterday. This is the headline I want to read. Man in public park solves koan with tuna sandwich. What's your headline? Ordinary school teacher dissolves 1,000 years of karmic conditioning at the sound of a bell. Page 2. Eyewitness accounts. Oryoki bowls remain full, even when empty. Miracle of life happens again. Second day in a row. Stay tuned for updates this evening. This is the news for the Bodhisattva. So the precepts are not just a code that some Buddhists take to enter the way, although that's part of it. They are the way things already are. The way things already are. Selfless, pure, still, radiant, and giving. Who is keeping these precepts? It is not through meanness, but the freely giving nature of trees and green plants that we live. Even in our home temples, it is not through deceit, but the honesty of architects and engineers and store clerks and Sanapak drivers and teachers and friends that these temples are built. Not only that is the honesty of earthworms and hummingbirds and bears. We live by the not killing, but cultivating and encouraging life from oceans and rainforests and the sun and the moon. The world is one selfless and interconnected whole. And as Dogen says, everything is functioning. Everything is completely expressing itself wholeheartedly in each moment. It is that he calls Zen-ki, undivided activity. So I want to come back to this first pure precept. In some ways, I see my own naivete. Each year I learn more, which is wonderful. May that continue. That I wanted to skip over that first pure and just get to the good stuff, the good and good for others. Do no harm, okay, move on. But actually, it is so essential because everything follows from that first pure precept. So we need to really investigate it. It says to cease from harm, release all self-attachment. Release all self-attachment. That is an endless investigation on the meaning of that. When I was in my first year of practice, there was a senior student, I think she was ordained at the time. And of course I listened with wide open to what everyone said. So I wanted to know the lay of the land. And especially those who've been practicing 10 years, what did they think? And I remember her saying, I'm not sure I want to be a no self. And I remembered the shock. I said, aren't we supposed to want that? But I'm glad she said it. It's a candid practice. I'm glad she said it because it said I had to figure it out for me. I had to figure it out here, what this path was and what that meant. And it's okay not to understand it and to be on the path. But we know that trying to be selfless doesn't work. It's incredibly difficult. Take one day of your life and say, from morning till night, I'm going to act completely selflessly, and see how far you get. It's very difficult, even though we sometimes try that. Very difficult. I imagine if Mushen's friend went to the park with that in mind, he would have said, I don't want to share this sandwich. I'd put a lot of work into this. The trying instantly brings up our shadow. This is why Buddhism is so wise. It recognizes that is the case. These precepts must rely on something other than our good will in that way, wanting to be a good Buddhist. I remember there was a client I had that for a couple of years, and I worked with him, and he was a really great example. He had a different faith tradition, but he was incredibly giving. He'd been brought up to be giving in his life and was very active, advocated for many people without a voice. He fed people who were unhoused. He was involved in Palestinian and Israeli conflict, trying to bring people together. So he also worked for an indigenous tribe. But he came to me because something was off. He wasn't well. He was ill in his body, lots of complaints. Relationships weren't going well. And it took a little while, and soon discovered that was this one thing that he couldn't allow himself. That was he had a really big house. And he felt like he should take in roommates because housing was needed. But what he really needed was solitude and space to do something he loved, which was to write. But in his mind, that was selfish. That was not giving. Other people could use that space. He shouldn't have it. This is the dilemma of our narrow ideas of what it means to do good. Not that all those things he did weren't good, but it was at the expense of his own gift. And when we come from that direction, it is like the right arm fighting the left. So I saw this, and we nudged him along until he could claim his writing and enter into that as a gift to the world. And one of the things he came upon was he wanted to write stories of people who he'd helped in the past. What a beautiful gift to the world, to record their stories. So who knows what will come of that? This is why we have to get very clear about selflessness and selfishness, what the difference is. And we do that by coming back to where I began, waking up to what is already true. What is already true. Otherwise, we are stuck with an entangled mind of, where is that self? How do I find it? How do I get rid of it? Maybe I don't want to get rid of it. That's an entanglement. It's not necessary. Because right now, as I speak, there are 17 people here completely giving themselves away. Right now. Giving your presence, your image, which you do not own, your breath, your mind, to this space. We are not in charge. What happens to our image and our breath and our presence? We cannot help but completely express ourselves in each moment, as we are doing it now. The precept says not to create reality for the self, but it's more like creating a self in opposition to reality. That is the problem. I think about, maybe 4 or 5 years into my practice, at least for the way that I made sense of things, I discovered something that was so liberating, so important to me. In my in lineage, and I don't use this term a lot, but up at Dharma they do, and it's fine. It works for many people. But I was constantly hearing I needed to drop the self, to drop the self, drop the self. Kyogen used that term a lot. Come to zero, he would say. But it wasn't until a long retreat that I discovered that it was already dropped. was already dropped. It didn't need to drop the self. It's not there. It is not there in the way we think it's there. There's nothing to attach to. The stories that I think I am or you are, whether I think I'm studious or lazy or falling apart or getting better, have only a vague correspondence to reality. If that. They're so limiting, and we're ever changing. The inner Zoom box that I refer to as my idea of myself has very little to do with anything. It simply grabs my attention. There is no self in the way we imagine it. We think we are very powerful, navigating our lives along, paying our bills, taking care. But in truth, we do not produce ourselves as we imagine. We are interdependent on everything: air, food, water, company, trees, birds, fishes, the biosphere, every breath we take. We are not the selves we think we are. And harm comes because we have the capacity to act as if we are separate. Not that we are separate. It's that our actions come from that delusion that is the source of harm. Once I understood and saw into that selflessness, that shift of attention was much easier to make. That shift into connection, that letting go of the absorption in that prison of self. That's what's referred to as clinging. It's as if we are clinging to our jail cells, the bars. And it shows up in our body, speech, and mind when we cling to this illusion, which is an illusion. It comes when the contraction in the body, when we think we're hiding, but we're in plain view. I was reading something at the Seido Zen priest manual. There is such a thing. I was reading in there, and it's a crude term, but they referred to the ego as an ego cramp. That was a really crude term. I was like, that kind of fits, because it is mostly the contraction against life where we realize this clinging to something that does not exist. It does not exist. I'm really grateful to the new identity of questioning. Of course, I want to just appropriate the term for 5 minutes and then hand it back to the LGBTQ community, if I'm allowed. I understand the pioneering of the fluidity of gender and breaking out of those old shells of shoulds. But what a wonderful identity, questioning. Isn't that great? Wouldn't it be nice if someone just came up to you on the street? How are you? Questioning. Or when you filled out forms, where do you live? And questioning. It's an answer to almost everything. It's questioning. That's who we are. How wonderful. How wonderful. It's a wise answer. It's what Bodhidharma said to Emperor Wu, who said after Emperor Wu was upset he wouldn't gain any merit from his great works. They were in a little entangle. Bodhidharma wondering how he's going to slip out of that, with his head probably. Emperor Wu says, Who is it that stands before me? And Bodhidharma says, sometimes translated as I don't know, but I translate it as I've seen others as not knowing. Who stands before me? Not knowing. Who stands before me? Questioning. Questioning. Or your guess is as good as mine. Then we're in another space together. Step out of the prison of the small self. I want to end with a poem. I do. I forgot my way. Mushin always tells me I should number my sheets of paper, and she's right. So I know which one comes first. But I do want to end with a poem, which is aptly titled, What's Left to Say? It's by Liesl Mueller, who I've been loving lately. Is What Is Left to Say, and it's about a self slipping out. The self steps out of the circle. It stops wanting to be the farmer, the wife, and the child. It stops trying to please by learning everyone's dialect. It finds it can live, after all, in a world of strangers. It sends itself fewer flowers. It stops preserving its tears in amber. How splendidly arrogant it was when it believed the gold-filled tomb of language awaited its raids. Now it frequents the junkyards, knowing all words are secondhand. It has not chosen its poverty, this new frugality. It did not want to fall out of love with itself. Young, it celebrated itself and richly sang itself, seeing only itself in the mirror of the world. It cannot return. It assumes its place in a universe of stars that do not see it. Even the dead no longer need it to be at peace. Its function is to applaud. Slipping out of the prison while no one's looking, oh so quietly, wordlessly, leaving the arrogance behind. Slip out quietly. Assume your place in the universe of stars.
Thank you.